The night air felt like a slap of freedom on my face as I stepped out, leaving behind the constant hum of Alex's computer. He was buried in his latest project, something about a critical system update that couldn't wait. "I'll be back late, don't wait up," I called over my shoulder, not sure if he even registered my departure. The bar was pulsing with life, a stark contrast to the quiet of our home. There, amidst the laughter and clinking glasses, I met Marco. His smile was easy, his conversation engaging, a refreshing change from the monosyllables Alex and I had exchanged lately. Marco was here for a business conference, he said, but his interest lay outside the conference room. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but the thrill of being noticed, truly seen, was intoxicating. Alex, with his relentless work ethic, had stopped seeing me a long time ago. So, when Marco suggested we take the night further, I didn't resist. The guilt was there, a quiet voice in the back of my mind, but I silenced it with the promise that it was just one night, a mistake Alex would never know about. Returning home as the sun peeked over the horizon, I found the house silent. Alex's absence was a relief, he must have crashed at his desk again. I crept into bed, my guilt a heavy blanket, yet I clung to the hope that my secret was safe. The next morning was a masterclass in normalcy. I buzzed around the kitchen, fixing breakfast, while Alex shuffled in, his eyes heavy with the weight of another all-nighter. "How was your night?" I asked, injecting cheer into my voice. Praying my guilt wasn't as visible as I feared. "Fine," he mumbled, his attention already drifting back to his laptop. But then, his gaze caught on something unexpected. A watch on the dresser, sleek and definitely not his. "What's this?" he asked, a flicker of curiosity in his voice. I panicked, my mind racing for explanations. "Oh, that? Just a little of something I picked up for you, surprise." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but Alex just nodded, accepting the lie with a tired smile. But as he turned away, I saw the shadow of doubt in his eyes. A silent sentinel awakened. I brushed off the unease, telling myself I was being paranoid. Alex was too caught up in his work to notice anything amiss, or so I hoped. The glow of my phone screen in the dimly lit room felt like the only source of life as I typed out a message to Marco. "Can't wait to see you again," I sent, my heart racing with a cocktail of excitement and guilt. The thrill of the secret we shared was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the monotony of my daily life with Alex. I quickly deleted the message, a routine now familiar, erasing any trail that might lead back to my indiscretion. Alex, ever the tech enthusiast, had mentioned installing a new home security app. "It's for our safety," he'd said, his eyes not meeting mine. I nodded, feigning interest, while my mind raced with the implications. How careless had I been? The thought nagged at me, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself Alex was too preoccupied with work to notice anything amiss. As days passed, my lies became more elaborate. "Another late meeting, I'd say, or the girls are insisting on a night out." Alex's responses were always brief, a simple "okay" or "be safe." Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that his brevity masked a growing suspicion. Alex's new habit of checking the security footage seemed innocent at first. "Just making sure everything's running smoothly," he'd comment. But the way his eyes lingered on the screen, searching for something, sent a chill down my spine. Still, he found nothing. Our encounters were always timed perfectly with his absences, or so I thought. The day I invited Marco over, telling him Alex would be working late, marked a turning point. The risk thrilled me, feeling like a challenge to the mundane life I'd grown accustomed to. But as Marco's car pulled into the driveway, an unexpected fear gripped me. What if Alex came home? And then, the unimaginable happened. Alex's car turned into the driveway hours earlier than expected. My heart stopped. I watched from the window as he paused, looking at Marco's car, then continued inside without a word. The calm with which he entered unsettled me more than any confrontation would have. Later, I found Alex sitting in front of his computer, the security footage open on the screen. His expression was unreadable as he watched. His fingers paused over the keyboard. The air between us was charged with an unspoken truth, a bridge crossed from which there was no return. I had to work late at the office, didn't expect you home, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to gauge his reaction. Alex didn't respond, his attention fixed on the screen. The silence was suffocating, a prelude to the storm I knew was coming. His discovery of my betrayal, through the very technology he installed to protect us, was a twist of fate I hadn't anticipated. The security meant to keep us safe had become the witness to my greatest folly. The moment I locked the front door, a shiver of anticipation ran through me. This weekend was supposed to be my escape, a brief dive into a world where guilt didn't shadow my every step. Off to the conference, I lied smoothly to Alex, my voice a practice blend of casual and hurried. He nodded, absorbed in his laptop, a faint "be careful" floating my way. I met Marco under the guise of dawn, the city still murmuring in its sleep. Our smiles were conspiratorial, laced with the thrill of stolen time, yet as I glanced back at the retreating silhouette of my home, a gnawing unease settled in. Alex's indifference last night seemed too studied, too serene. Meanwhile, Alex was setting a trap with a calmness that belied his turmoil. Copying the security footage, he meticulously compiled every shred of evidence of my betrayal. His actions were methodical, a stark contrast to the storm of betrayal brewing within. As I drove away, imagining the freedom of the weekend ahead, Alex was already on my trail. His following was discreet, a shadow amidst the morning light. Every step I took with Marco, every lie I fabricated, Alex documented with a detached precision that would later haunt me. The conference was a facade, a brittle veil over my deception. When Alex's text arrived, "How's the conference going?" My heart skipped a beat. My fingers trembled as I replied. "Productive. Missing you." The words felt like ash in my mouth, a lie too big to swallow. His immediate, "glad to hear it, take care," sent a cold shiver down my spine. The casualness of his response was out of character, too composed, sparking a paranoia that gnawed at the edges of my exhilaration. Did he know? The question echoed in my mind, a relentless tide eroding the shores of my resolve. The weekend blurred, a mix of stolen moments and mounting dread. Each glance at my phone, each innocent beep, felt like it could be the harbinger of my world unraveling. Alex's silence was oppressive, a vacuum filled with unasked questions and unvoiced accusations. As I returned home, the facade of normalcy I had tried to maintain began to crumble. The house, once a haven, now felt like a stage set for the final act of a tragedy. Alex's eyes met mine, a mirror reflecting back all my guilt and fear. The air between us was charged with the weight of unspoken truths, the silence a tightrope we both tread carefully, each step potentially catastrophic. In that moment, I understood the depth of the chasm my actions had carved between us. The man I had married, whose love had once felt like a fortress, now seemed an inscrutable stranger, his thoughts a maze I could no longer navigate. The realization was a cold hand around my heart, squeezing tight with the understanding that the life I had known was irrevocably altered. The drive back home was a blur, each mile a countdown to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. Cutting the weekend short had been a desperate move, a flimsy attempt to regain some control over the spiraling mess my life had become. "I have to go back," I had told Marco, my voice a mix of urgency and regret. He didn't understand, couldn't possibly grasp the depth of the chaos awaiting me. As I turned the key in the lock, my heart pounded against my chest. A drumbeat of impending doom. The house was silent, the kind of silence that screams, filled with the weight of unspoken words. And there he was. Alex, sitting in the living room, his laptop open before him. A tableau of betrayal illuminated on the screen. His eyes lifted to meet mine and the world seemed to freeze. The air between us was charged with a palpable tension, a prelude to the storm we were about to enter. "Mia," he began, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that must have been raging inside him. The evidence was laid bare before us. texts, photos, video footage, each piece a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I can explain, I started, my voice trembling. The words felt hollow, even to me. It was a mistake. I felt so neglected, so alone. The excuses sounded pathetic in my ears, a feeble attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Alex's face was a mask of stoicism, his eyes cold and distant. A mistake, he echoed, the words laced with a bitterness that cut to the bone. You call this a mistake? He gestured to the screen, to the undeniable proof of my infidelity. I reached out, a plea in my gesture, but he recoiled as if my touch burned. I'm sorry, Alex. I never meant for any of this to happen. My apology was sincere, but I could see it did nothing to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Sorry doesn't change anything, Mia. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I want a divorce. I've already seen a lawyer. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Divorce. The finality of it was overwhelming, a future I had never envisioned now laid out before me. The realization that my actions had irrevocably destroyed our marriage crashed over me, a tidal wave of guilt and regret. How had I let things go so far? How had I been so reckless with the most important relationship in my life? The weeks that followed were a living nightmare. We were two strangers sharing a space, the air between us thick with tension and unspoken recriminations. Conversations were terse, limited to the logistics of separating our lives, a bureaucratic untangling of a once inseparable bond. Living in the shadow of my betrayal, every interaction with Alex was a reminder of the love we had lost, a love I had thrown away. The home we had built together now felt like a prison, each room a monument to a happier time, a time before my indiscretions shattered everything. The process of sorting out our separation was methodical, a clinical dissection of a life once shared now splintered beyond repair. From the moment I wake up to the second I force my eyes shut, the urgency to make things right, to somehow undo the damage I've caused consumes me. The air in the house feels heavier now, charged with the ghost of our shared laughter and the echo of our arguments. I reach out to Alex, clumsily attempting to stitch the gaping wound I've inflicted on our marriage. Can we talk? My texts remain unanswered, my calls go straight to voicemail. His indifference is a clear message, I'm alone in this tempest I've created. The day Alex moves out is a blur, he's methodical, packing his belongings with a precision that's alien to the chaos of our current situation. Our conversations are brief, functional, devoid of the warmth we once shared. The finality of his departure, the door closing behind him, leaves me in a silence so profound it's suffocating. When the divorce papers arrive, they're a cold slap of reality. The terms are harsh, a reflection of my betrayal. Reading through them, my heart sinks further with every line. The legal language is sterile, but its implications are painfully clear. I am at fault, and I will pay the price. Desperate for some semblance of control, I seek legal advice, hoping for a loophole, a way to mitigate the consequences of my actions. But the lawyer's words are a heavy gavel of truth. With the evidence Alex has, your options are limited. His tone is sympathetic, but it offers no comfort. The weight of my decisions, the gravity of my mistake, is mine to bear alone. The isolation that follows is a slow, creeping tide. Friends and family, once the bedrock of my support system, drift away. Their disappointment is a mirror to my own self-loathing. The silence from Alex's camp is expected, but the cold shoulders from those I considered my own are a bitter pill to swallow. The narrative of my mistake spreads like wildfire, a story told in hushed tones and shared looks of pity and condemnation. Even Marco, the man for whom I risked everything, becomes a ghost. His messages, once a source of excitement, now go unanswered. His decision to distance himself is the final nail in the coffin of our brief, tumultuous affair. I can't do this, his last message reads, a simple sentence that feels like a verdict on my character. The house, once a sanctuary of our love, is now a mausoleum of what could have been. Each room is filled with memories. each object a testament to the life we built together. Now they're just reminders of the cost of my selfishness. The loneliness is a constant companion, a shadow that follows me through the empty halls, whispering truths I'm not ready. I remember the exact moment I realized that my life had become a black and white film. It was a Tuesday evening, typical in every sense. Tom was still at work, as usual. I sat at our dining table, the one that seemed too large now, surrounded by silence, save for the occasional tick of the clock that seemed to mock my solitude. My days had become a pattern, repeated with such precision it was almost laughable. Mornings were filled with the hum of the coffee maker, the only sound breaking the quiet of our too-perfect suburban home. I'd scroll through my phone, the glow of the screen a poor substitute for actual human interaction. Then I'd go for a run, the same route every day, waving at the same neighbors, who always seemed too caught up in their own lives to notice the lack of joy in my smile. By afternoon, I'd find myself lost in a book or a TV show, anything to fill the void of the day until Tom came home. Except he rarely did before I gave in to sleep. The cycle was numbing, and I was drowning in the monotony of it all. That night, the one that changed everything, I was pulled out of my routine. My friend Laura had been insisting for weeks that we have a girls' night out. "You need to get out of the house, Anna. You're turning into a hermit," she'd say. And maybe she was right. So, I found myself trading my yoga pants for a dress that hadn't seen the light of day in months. The bar was crowded, a stark contrast to the silence of my home. The air was filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, a melody of life being lived. Laura was in her element, chatting and laughing, and for a moment, I felt a spark of something. Excitement? Anticipation? I wasn't sure. Then he walked in, Michael. He was like a splash of color in my gray world. We bumped into each other, quite literally. I was trying to navigate through the crowd, and there he was, turning around with 2 drinks in his hands. One of them ended up on my dress, a blooming stain that seemed to mirror the sudden rush of embarrassment and surprise on my face. "I am so sorry," he said, his eyes wide with concern. He was attractive, with a smile that reached his eyes and an air of confidence that was immediately intriguing. "It's okay, really," I found myself saying, even as Laura rushed over with a pile of napkins. We started talking, and I was drawn to his charm and easy conversation. He was attentive, asking about my life, my interests, something I hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. The evening flew by, and before I knew it, it was time to go home. Michael asked for my number, and I hesitated. This was dangerous territory, I knew. But the thrill of the evening, the connection I felt, it was intoxicating. I gave it to him, telling myself it was just an innocent exchange. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he laughed, the way he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was a stark contrast to the silence that greeted me as I walked back into my house. Tom's note on the fridge read, "Working late again, don't wait up." It was as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, showing me what I was missing. I lay in bed that night, the image of Michael's smile lingering in my mind. The guilt was there, niggling at the edge of my consciousness, but it was overshadowed by a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt alive. The first message popped up on my phone while I was stirring a pot of spaghetti, a mundane Tuesday evening task. It was from Michael. "Had a great time meeting you, hope the dress survived." My heart did a little skip. A silly reaction, perhaps, but it felt like a beam of sunlight piercing through the gray clouds of my routine life. We started messaging back and forth. It was harmless at first, or so I told myself. Little anecdotes about our days, shared jokes, the occasional meme. But with every message, I felt a pull, like a tide drawing me further away from the safe shore of my marriage. Tom was still absent, buried in his work. I'd lie in bed next to his sleeping form at night, my phone illuminating the darkness, rereading messages from Michael. They were like a drug, each word a dose of something exhilarating, something forbidden. Guild gnawed at me, an unwelcome companion in the quiet moments. I was betraying Tom, betraying our vows. But, then, wasn't Tom betraying me too, in his own way? With his endless hours at the office, his lack of interest in my life, in me? One evening, the messages with Michael took a turn. Flirtation tiptoed into open desire. My fingers trembled as I typed, each message erasing a boundary I had once held sacred. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop. The inevitable happened. Michael asked to meet, just for a coffee, he said. Innocent, right? But we both knew it was anything but. We met at a quaint little cafe, tucked away in a corner of the city where no one would recognize me. The moment I saw him, waiting outside, my heart was racing. He greeted me with that charming smile, and any pretense of this being just coffee evaporated. We talked, laughed, and then, as if drawn by a force neither of us could resist, found ourselves walking to his apartment. The city around us blurred into a backdrop for my racing thoughts. His apartment was a stark contrast to the home I shared with Tom. It was vibrant, alive with color and energy. Every object seemed to tell a story of adventure, of a life lived fully. And then, it happened. The moment where everything changed. Our first kiss was a spark that set aflame all the pent-up longing, the unacknowledged desires. It was wrong, it was reckless, but in that moment, none of it mattered. Afterwards, lying in the tangle of sheets, a myriad of emotions washed over me. Elation, guilt, fear, excitement, a cocktail of feelings I couldn't untangle. Michael was asleep, his face peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. I slipped out of bed and dressed quietly, my movements robotic. As I left his apartment, the cool night air felt like a slap, a wake-up call. What had I done? The drive home was a blur. I walked into the house, a shell of the woman who had left earlier. Tom was there, working on his laptop, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. Late night? He asked, not looking up. Yeah. Lost track of time, I mumbled, my voice a stranger to my ears. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Michael's touch still lingering on my skin. The weight of what I'd done pressed down on me, suffocating, inescapable. I had crossed a line, broken a promise, and there was no turning back. I stared at myself in the mirror, the woman looking back at me a stranger. She was someone who sneaked around, lied, and now justified her betrayal. I told myself it was Tom's neglect, his absence, that pushed me into Michael's arms. I needed to feel wanted, alive. But the mirror only reflected my guilt, no matter how I dressed it up. Tom had started to notice. Small things at first, my distracted smiles, the way I jumped at sudden texts. Everything okay? He'd ask, his brow furrowed in concern I hadn't seen in years. Yeah. Just tired, I'd lie, hating myself a little more each time. My life had split in two. There was the public Anna, Tom's wife, who cooked dinners and attended mundane social gatherings, her smiles carefully curated. And then, there was this other Anna, the one who waited eagerly for Michael's messages, who lived for those stolen moments in his apartment. The strain of this double life was cracking my facade. I was constantly on edge, a tangle of nerves and lies. Every "I love you" to Tom tasted like ash, every touch from Michael scorched my conscience. Then, one evening, Tom did something unexpected. I came home to find candles lit and dinner waiting. He'd cooked my favorite homemade lasagna, a clumsy yet endearing attempt. There was even a small, clumsily wrapped gift on the table. I thought we needed a night to ourselves. Just us, he said, a hopeful smile on his face. I sat there, the walls of my deceit closing in. The gift felt like a physical weight, a reminder of what I was jeopardizing. I unwrapped it, a photo album, filled with pictures of our life together. Holidays, birthdays, quiet days at home captured moments of a life I was betraying. Tom, words failed me. How did I end up here? How did I become this person? Anna, I know I've been distant. Work has been crazy, but I want to make it up to you. I love you, he said, reaching for my hand. I withdrew my hand gently, my heart aching. I love you too, I whispered, the lie choking me. Sleep eluded me that night. Tom's gift sat on my nightstand, a silent accusation. I thought of Michael, exciting, passionate, but it was Tom's hurt face that haunted me. I was playing a dangerous game, juggling two worlds that couldn't coexist. My marriage, once the anchor of my life, now felt like a sinking ship, and I was the one who had drilled the hole. Lying there, in the dark, the magnitude of my betrayal loomed over me. I had wanted attention, excitement, but at what cost? The love of a good man, the respect of the person I used to be? As dawn broke, the weight of my decisions lay heavy on my chest. I had to make a choice, but the path ahead was blurred, obscured by my lies and desires. Whichever way I turned, I knew one thing for certain: this couldn't go on. If you've enjoyed what you've seen and want to stay updated with more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to keep bringing you more of the content you love. Plus, subscribing ensures you won't miss out on any of our future updates. It's a win-win. Thanks for being a part of our community, and we can't wait to share more with you. Keep the likes and comments coming, and remember, every subscribe brings us closer to our next exciting update. So, what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button and join our growing family. It was a crisp Wednesday evening when my two worlds collided. Michael and I were at his place, the room warmed by the soft glow of the lamp. He looked at me with those intense eyes that always seemed to see right through me. Anna, I've been thinking, he began, his voice serious, we're great together. Why don't we make this official? Official. The word echoed in my head like a warning siren. I had been so caught up in this whirlwind that I hadn't considered the possibility of this conversation. Fear gripped me, a fear of losing what I had with Michael, but also of revealing the truth. Michael, I stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. What's holding you back? Are you scared? Because I'm all in, he said, reaching for my hand. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I can't, I whispered. Can't, what do you mean? His confusion was a mirror of my inner turmoil. That's when his phone rang. He glanced at it, irritation flashing in his eyes, but something made him answer. I watched, my heart pounding, as his expression changed from annoyance to shock. Who was it? I asked, my voice barely audible. That was Tom, he said, the name hanging between us like a curse. Your husband, Tom. The room spun around me. Tom had found out, and he had called Michael. How could you? Michael's voice was low, dangerous. You're married? You've been lying to me this whole time? The accusations hit me like physical blows. Michael, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Save it, Anna. I don't know who you are, he said, turning away. The hurt in his voice was palpable. I reached for him, desperate to explain, to make him understand. But he shrugged me off. You've been using me, I was just a game to you. No, it wasn't like that. I care about you, Michael. I just got lost, I pleaded. Lost? You're not lost, Anna. You're a liar. The finality in his voice was a death knell to whatever we had. I stumbled out of his apartment, the night air cold against my tear-streaked face. The world seemed to tilt, a sickening carousel of my own making. How had I let things get this far? How had I been so selfish? Driving home, I braced myself for the confrontation with Tom. But nothing could have prepared me for the emptiness of the house. Tom's things were gone, just a note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this. Don't try to find me. In that moment, the magnitude of my actions crashed down on me. I had destroyed everything. My marriage, my relationship with Michael, my self-respect, all in ruins because of my own selfishness. The house, once a symbol of my marital bliss, now felt like a prison, each room a reminder of what I had lost. I sank to the floor, my sobs echoing in the hollow space, mourning not just for what I had done to Tom and Michael, but for the woman I had once been and lost along the way. I remember the panic that set in, a relentless tide, as I raced to Michael's apartment the next morning. The streets blurred past, a backdrop to the chaos in my heart. I had to fix this, had to stop Michael before everything spiraled out of control. When he opened the door, his face was a mask of anger and betrayal. "What do you want, Anna?" His voice was cold, a stark contrast to the warmth I had grown used to. "Michael, please, don't tell Tom. I'll end things with him. I just need time," I pleaded, my voice trembling. The sight of him, so hurt and distant, was a knife to my heart. "You think that makes this okay? You've been lying to both of us." His voice rose in frustration. I know, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just so lost," I said, the words spilling out in a torrent of desperation. He shook his head. "I can't be part of this, Anna. I can't trust you." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Michael, please." My voice broke, a whisper of the chaos inside me. He looked at me, his eyes a tumult of emotions. Then, with a finality that made my heart sink, he said, "I'm sorry, Anna. I had to do what's right." The door closed between us, and with it, any hope of salvaging what I had destroyed. The drive home was a blur. I walked into an eerily quiet house, the ticking of the clock in the hallway a reminder of the time slipping away, time I no longer had control over. Then, Tom's voice shattered the silence. "Anna, we need to talk." I turned to see him holding his phone, his face a portrait of shock and anger. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at the screen and my heart sank. It was a message from Michael, detailing our affair, our lies. The evidence was undeniable. "Tom, words failed me. How could I explain the inexplicable? How could you do this to us?" His voice cracked, the pain in it more piercing than any accusation. I tried to reach for him, to offer some comfort, some explanation. But he stepped back, a barrier of hurt between us. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he said, his voice hollow. I stood there, watching the man I had married, the man I had built a life with, crumble before my eyes. The weight of my betrayal, the magnitude of my selfishness, it all came crashing down on me. "I'm sorry, Tom, I'm so sorry," I said, the words inadequate, pitiful even to my own ears. Tom looked at me, a mix of disbelief and sorrow in his eyes. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, out of my life. The house, once filled with laughter and love, was now just an empty shell, echoing with the ghosts of what had been. I was alone, truly alone, the architect of my own destruction. As I sat there, the gravity of what I had done enveloped me. I had sought attention, excitement, but at what cost? My marriage, my love, my integrity, all sacrificed on the altar of my selfishness. And in the end, I was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the shards of a life I had shattered. The silence in the house was deafening, each room echoing with the remnants of a life that had crumbled overnight. Tom was gone, his departure leaving a void that was suffocating. I tried calling him, but each voicemail felt like a whisper into an abyss. I reached out to Michael, a last-ditch attempt to cling to something, anything. But he was a closed door, his messages a clear wall of finality: "Don't contact me again." The friends who had once filled our home with laughter were now just distant echoes. Phone calls went unanswered, invitations unextended. The few who did speak to me had words laced with disappointment and judgment. "How could you?" they asked, a question I had asked myself 1,000 times. My parents, ever the emblem of marital fidelity, were a blend of heartbreak and disapproval. "We raised you better than this," they said, their words a sharpened blade to my already fragile sense of self. Without Tom's income, the financial dam broke. Bills piled up, a mountain of dues that I couldn't climb. The bank called, voices of concern now edged with impatience. I started selling things, jewelry, some furniture, anything to keep the lights on. But it was like trying to stop a flood with a teacup. The job market was unforgiving. My resume, once a point of pride, now seemed laughably inadequate. Interviews came and went, each a reminder of how much my world had changed. "We'll be in touch," they'd say, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any rejection. I spent my days moving through the house like a ghost, each room a mausoleum of memories. The bed I once shared with Tom, the couch where Michael and I had laughed, all now artifacts of a life that was no more. Nights were the worst. The darkness seemed to press in, a physical weight. Loneliness was a constant companion, whispering reminders of my failures. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the chasm in my heart a gaping wound. The mirror became my accuser, reflecting a woman I barely recognize. My eyes, once bright with hopes and dreams, were now dull, the light extinguished by my own actions. I ventured out only when necessary, the outside world a barrage of reminders of what I had lost. Couples walking hand in hand, families laughing together, scenes from a movie I was no longer part of. The grocery store became a gauntlet, each, "How are you?" a reminder of the facade I had to maintain. "Fine, thanks," I'd lie, my smile as brittle as glass. The days blurred into each other, a monotonous gray. I was trapped in a purgatory of my own making, a prisoner of my choices. As I sat in the empty house, the realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had sought to escape a life of monotony, but in my recklessness, I had destroyed everything. Now, I was left with less than what I had started with, no love, no companionship, nothing but the echo of my mistakes. In that crushing solitude, the full weight of my actions settled in. I had wanted more from life, but in my selfishness, I had ended up with nothing at all. In the small, dimly lit room of my new apartment, I sat alone, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. The walls were bare, the space unfamiliar and cold. This was my new reality, a far cry from the life I once knew. It was here, in this solitude, that reflection became my companion. The pain I had caused Tom, the hurt I had inflicted on Michael, the disappointment of my friends and family, all were laid bare in the harsh light of my new life. I realized I had been seeking fulfillment in others, neglecting the one person I needed to understand the most, myself. With a heavy heart, I reached out to Tom. I needed to apologize, to try and mend what I had broken, even if just a little. His response was a kind but firm closure. "Anna, I've moved on. I can't go back to what we had. I wish you the best." His words, though painful, were a necessary blow. I had to let him go, to allow him the happiness he deserved. The loss of the house was inevitable. Without Tom's income and with my dwindling savings, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage. Signing those papers, letting go of the home we had built together, was like closing the book on a chapter of my life. In this small apartment, I faced new challenges. The loneliness was suffocating, a constant reminder of the consequences of my actions. Daily tasks felt monumental, each day a battle against the despair that threatened to. If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be sneaking around, cheating on my husband of 10 years, I'd have laughed in their face. Yet, here I am, living a double life that's spiraling out of control faster than a car on black ice. It all started at a charity gala. The kind where you wear a dress that costs more than a month's mortgage and pretend to care about whatever cause you're supporting. That's where I met him, Alex. He was charming, witty, and everything my mundane marriage wasn't. He gave me a taste of excitement I hadn't realized I was starving for. Our affair was like a thrilling novel I couldn't put down. We'd meet in secret, stealing moments that were ours alone. It was an escape, a fantasy. But fantasies don't last forever, and neither do secrets. Alex's demands started small. A few more nights together, more daring public outings. But then, he dropped the bombshell. He wanted me to leave my husband, Mark. I was taken aback. Leave Mark? The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. For all the monotony, he was my stability, my home. I told Alex that what we had was just a fling, nothing more. But Alex didn't take that well. He felt I was playing him, leading him on. So, he cooked up a plan. One that reeked of desperation and revenge. He started going to the same gym as Mark, striking up a friendship under the guise of wanting new workout buddies. I could see his twisted logic: get close to Mark, and I'd be forced to make a decision. I remember the day Mark came home, talking about his new gym buddy, Alex. My heart nearly stopped. I had to play it cool, act like the name meant nothing. But inside, I was screaming. This game of Alex's was dangerous, and I knew it was only a matter of time before our worlds collided in the worst possible way. Every day became a nerve-wracking dance. I'd watch Mark and Alex interact, my stomach twisted into knots, praying that Alex wouldn't let slip anything about us. But I could see the glint in his eye, the slight smirk when he looked my way. He was enjoying this, the power he had over me. I had to find a way out of this twisted triangle. But with each passing day, the web we'd woven grew tighter, more entangled. I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before everything I cared about went up in flames. In the game of secrets, the truth is a ticking time bomb, and mine was set to detonate at any moment. It was a typical Tuesday evening, the kind where normalcy is a thin veil over the chaos of lies. I was in the kitchen, lost in thought, when Alex, my lover-turned-my-husband's gym buddy, walked in. He wore a casual smile, but his eyes held a different story, a dangerous mix of desire and desperation. "Hey," he said, as if we were just old friends catching up. I forced a smile, aware of the walls around us that held my life's biggest lie. Alex's visits to our house were becoming more frequent, a strategy in his twisted game to push me to a decision I wasn't ready to make. But tonight, he was different, more bold, more reckless. Maybe it was the way he looked at me or the tone in his voice when he asked, "Is Mark not home yet?" His words were casual, but they dripped with a hidden agenda. Before I could answer, Alex closed the distance between us. His kiss was aggressive, a stark contrast to the covert touches we shared in the shadows of our affair. It was a kiss that screamed possession, a claim he had no right to make. The sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. Mark, my husband of 10 years, the man I had betrayed in pursuit of a fleeting thrill, walked in. His eyes widened, taking in the scene before him, a scene I never imagined he would witness. "Alex, what the hell?" Mark's voice was more confused than angry, an echo of the denial that had become his shield against the truth. I pushed Alex away, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's not what it looks like," I stammered, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Alex, ever the actor, played along. "Sorry, man, I tripped, and it just happened." His excuse was as flimsy as the trust one had broken, but Mark nodded, wanting to believe the lie more than the truth that stared him in the face. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Dinner was a quiet affair, with forced conversation and strained smiles. Alex left soon after, throwing me a look that held a warning. This game was far from over. Later that night, as I lay next to Mark, his steady breathing a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind, I couldn't shake off the guilt. The close call with Alex was a wake-up call, a reminder of the dangerous path I was walking. But even as I made silent promises to end the affair, I couldn't help but wonder about the hints Alex had been dropping to Mark during their gym sessions. Was my husband really in the dark, or was he just clinging to a fading image of the life we once had? Sleep eluded me that night, as I lay tangled in a web of my own making, each thread a lie, a secret, a moment of betrayal. The truth was out there, hovering on the edge of our lives, waiting for the moment to strike and unravel everything. The day my world came crashing down began like any other, with the sun peeking through the curtains and the familiar hum of the city outside. But under the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would sweep away the life I knew. It started with a text message, an anonymous hint that pierced the bubble of my secret affair. "Does your husband know about your little escapades?" The message read. My heart sank. Alex, my lover, had taken his game to a new level, sending these cryptic messages to Mark, my husband. Each message was a ticking time bomb, set to expose the life I had so carefully compartmentalized. Unbeknownst to me, Mark was already 2 steps ahead. The trust we had built over a decade was crumbling, and in his desperation, he resorted to something I never thought him capable of. Hidden cameras. Small, almost imperceptible eyes that watched and recorded my every move. My betrayal, once shrouded in secrecy, was now playing out in high definition on the screens he watched, hidden away in his makeshift surveillance room. The day he confronted me was a blur. I returned home to find him sitting in the living room, his face a mask of betrayal and hurt. The screens around him played my deceit on a loop, a relentless reminder of the double life I had led. Is it true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The evidence was irrefutable, yet a part of me wanted to lie, to weave another tale to cover my tracks. But the weight of his gaze, heavy with the pain I had caused, broke down my defenses. Yes, I admitted, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. The confession was a dam breaking, and the truth poured out in a torrent of tears and apologies. Mark listened, his face unreadable, as I laid bare the affair that had torn our family apart. But understanding or forgiveness was not on the agenda. The hurt in his eyes turned to resolve, a resolve that chilled me to the bone. I want a divorce, he said, his voice steady, and I'm filing for full custody of the kids. The words were a final blow, shattering the remnants of our life together. In that moment, I realized the gravity of my actions. My affair was not just a series of clandestine meetings and stolen moments. It was the catalyst that unraveled the fabric of our family. The home we had built, the love we had nurtured, all of it was coming undone because of my selfish desires. As Mark walked away, leaving me alone with the echoes of our life together, I understood the true cost of my betrayal. It wasn't just about losing Mark or the comfort of our marriage. It was about losing my family, the very core of my world. The chapter closed on a life that once was, leaving me to face the consequences of my actions. A house of cards, once so meticulously constructed, lay in ruins around me. And as the sun set on the darkest day of my life, I knew there was no going back. The path ahead was one of reckoning and facing the harsh reality of a future I had never imagined. If someone had told me that my once coveted life would unravel in a spectacle for all to see, I'd have laughed it off as a bad joke. Yet, there I was, the center of a scandal that stripped me of everything I once held dear. The affair that I thought was my secret escape had burst into the open, splashed across social media and whispered about in every corner of my previously welcoming community. The day it all became public, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from friends, or rather, people I once called friends, filled my screen, each message a mix of shock, judgment, and the underlying tone of betrayal. I watched, as if from outside my body, how quickly my social standing crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. Then came the most unexpected twist. Alex, the man who had ignited this chaos, chose this tumultuous moment to declare his love. He came to my now lonely house, his eyes shining with a victory that made my stomach churn. "Marry me," he said, as if the words were the cure to the disaster he'd helped create. His proposal felt like a slap in the face. How could he think I would turn to him, the architect of my downfall? In a moment of clarity amongst the madness, I realized I still loved my husband, despite the chasm my actions had created between us. I refused Alex, firmly, hoping it would close this painful chapter. But rejection only fueled Alex's anger. He turned vindictive, unleashing a new wave of torment. Pictures, messages, and videos are private moments. Now weapons in his hands were sent to my family, friends, and, worst of all, my workplace. The embarrassment was suffocating, each new revelation a dagger twisting in my already wounded soul. The final blow came from my job. My boss, a woman I'd respected and admired, called me into her office. The look on her face said it all before she even spoke. I'm sorry, but we have to let you go. The scandal. It's too much for the company. Just like that, my career, something I had worked tirelessly for, vanished into thin air. I left the office that day feeling like a pariah. The vibrant city streets I once loved now felt cold and judging. Every glance seemed accusatory, every whisper felt like a condemnation. I was no longer just a woman who had made a mistake. I was the subject of gossip, a cautionary tale of morality gone awry. As I walked the familiar path home, now a path of shame and regret, the full weight of my actions hit me. The affair, a misguided quest for excitement, had cost me everything. My friends, my reputation, my career, and most painfully, the love and trust of my family, all gone in the wake of my recklessness. Sitting alone in the echoing emptiness of the house I once shared with my husband and children, I pondered the ruins of my life. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the isolation my betrayal had earned me. The crown of social standing I had once worn with pride was now a crown of thorns, each thorn a piercing reminder of a choice poorly made, a trust broken, a life shattered. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Each wooden pew, each solemn face, echoed the gravity of what was about to unfold. This wasn't just a divorce proceeding, it was the final unraveling of a life I had once held dear. As I sat there, awaiting my turn to speak, the weight of my choices bore down on me like a physical force. When Mark, my soon-to-be ex-husband, took the stand, his pain was palpable. With every piece of evidence he presented, photos, messages, videos, the life we had built together crumbled a little more. The judge's gavel sounded like thunder in the tense silence, each strike a nail in the coffin of our marriage. The verdict was a blow, albeit expected. Limited visitation rights to my children, that was the price of my indiscretion. A few, brief hours each week to be a mother, a role I had once cherished and taken for granted. As the gavel fell with a final, resounding thud, sealing the fate of my broken family, a part of me shattered. The strain on my relationship with my children was immediate and heart-wrenching. Their eyes, once bright and full of love when they looked at me, were now clouded with confusion and hurt. Our interactions were stilted, filled with awkward silences and forced conversations. The mother they knew and loved was replaced by a stranger, a woman they visited out of obligation rather than desire. Mark's decision to move out our family home with the children was the next crushing blow. I remember standing in the driveway, watching the moving truck pull away, taking pieces of my heart with it. The house that once echoed with laughter and love now stood silent, a mausoleum of memories and broken dreams. Alone in the house, I wandered through the rooms, each one a stark reminder of what I had lost. The living room, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays. The kitchen, where I had cooked meals for a family that no longer existed. The children's rooms, now empty and lifeless. The walls seemed to close in on me, the silence a deafening roar in my ears. Nights were the hardest. The emptiness was suffocating, the loneliness a constant companion. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events that led to this moment. The affair, a decision made in a moment of weakness, had set off a chain reaction that destroyed everything I held dear. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of my new life settled in. A life devoid of the laughter of my children, the warmth of my husband's embrace, the comfort of a family. The once lively house was now a tomb, each room a grave for the life I once had. I realized then that the consequences of my actions were not just mine to bear. My children, innocent bystanders in this tragedy, were also paying the price. The guilt was overwhelming, a constant ache in my heart that refused to subside. In the silence of the empty house, I was left to confront the truth of my actions. The affair, once a thrilling escape, was now the source of my greatest regret. The cost of my fleeting happiness was the destruction of my family, a price too high for any moment of pleasure. As I sat amidst the ruins of my life, I understood the painful truth: some mistakes are irreparable, their consequences echoing long after the moment has passed. There's a moment in every downward spiral where you hit the bottom so hard, you can almost hear the shatter of your life breaking apart. For me, that moment came when I, in a fit of loneliness and desperation, dialed Alex's number, the man who had been both my lover and the architect of my downfall. The phone rang, each tone a hammer to my fragile heart. When he finally answered, his words were like ice. "You're too much trouble," he said, and with those 4 words, the last thread of my misguided hope was severed. The rejection was a harsh slap of reality. I found solace at the bottom of a bottle, each sip a temporary escape from the overwhelming sense of betrayal and loss. My days and nights blurred into a continuous loop of drinking and self-pity. The house, once a symbol of familial warmth, now felt like a prison of my own making, its walls echoing with the ghosts of my past happiness. It was during one of these alcohol-fueled evenings that my phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, yet it carried a weight that sobered me up instantly. "I'm Alex's wife," she said, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. My mind reeled. His wife? The revelation was a gut punch, another deception in a saga that seemed to have no end. She told me a story that twisted the knife even further. Alex had planned to blackmail me from the beginning. The affair, the friendship with my husband, the photographs, it was all a setup, a game where I was nothing but a pawn. The knowledge that I had been used so callingly, not just by Alex but by my own foolishness, left me reeling. The aftermath of this revelation was like living in a nightmare. My financial situation, already strained by the divorce and legal fees, spiraled out of control. Bills piled up, unopened and ominous. The once secure life I had known was crumbling under the weight of my decisions. The final blow came when I received the foreclosure notice. The house, the home where I had raised my children, where I had lived the best and worst moments of my life, was slipping through my fingers. The move to a small, run-down apartment felt like crossing into a different world. The space was cramped, the walls thin, and the sounds of the city unrelenting. Gone were the spacious rooms and quiet comfort of my former home. Here, in this modest, dingy space, I was confronted with the stark reality of my new life. In the confines of that apartment, surrounded by boxes of a past life and the echoes of my mistakes, the full extent of my fall from grace hit me. I had traded my family, my home, and my dignity for a fleeting affair that left me with nothing but regret and a bitter taste of betrayal. Each day was a struggle, a battle against the remorse that threatened to consume me. The loneliness was suffocating, a constant reminder of the love and life I had so carelessly thrown away. As I lay awake at night, listening to the sounds of the city, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led me to this point. The affair, once a secret thrill, now felt like a poison that had seeped into every aspect of my life, leaving destruction in its wake. The day I heard that Mark had remarried was like being submerged in ice-cold water. The news came through the grapevine, whispered with a mix of pity and disdain. He had found someone new, a woman described as kind and loving, a stark contrast to the wreck I had become. The knowledge that another woman was taking my place, not just in Mark's life but in my children's, was a pill too bitter to swallow. Despite the chasm my actions had created, I tried to bridge the gap with my children. I reached out, my heart in my throat, longing for a connection, for forgiveness. But their rejection was swift and unequivocal. The pain in their voices was clear. I was no longer the mother they knew, but a stranger who had broken their trust and their home. Around the same time, news came that Alex, the catalyst of my downfall, had moved to another city. His departure felt like the closing of a chapter, a final act in the tragedy that had become my life. He had achieved his revenge, leaving me to wallow in the aftermath of the storm he had helped create. Alone, with no one to turn to, the consequences of my actions loomed over me like a dark cloud. My days were filled with a suffocating loneliness, my nights haunted by the ghosts of my past choices. It was during these bleak moments that I started receiving the messages, texts and calls from unknown numbers, each one more threatening than the last. My already fragile world was now tinged with fear. I reported the threats to the police, clinging to the hope of finding some semblance of security. But hope, it seemed, was a luxury I could no longer afford. The police found no evidence, no leads to follow. I was alone, unprotected, the architect of my own demise. The stress of it all, the loneliness, the fear, the guilt, began to take a toll on my health. My body, once strong and vibrant, now felt like a fragile shell. I struggled to find the energy to face each day, my spirit as broken as my body. Then came the night when it all became too much. I remember feeling dizzy, the room spinning around me as I tried to stand. The floor rushed up to meet me, and then there was darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils, the beeping of machines creating a discordant symphony. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the reality of my situation hit me. This was the culmination of a series of choices, each one leading me further down the path of self-destruction. I had lost my husband, my children, my home, and now, my health was failing. In the solitude of the hospital room, with nothing but the steady beep of the heart monitor for company, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. Each decision, each mistake, was a step away from the life I had cherished, a step towards the abyss into which I had fallen. The hospital became a temporary refuge, a place to escape the threats and the loneliness. But it was also a stark reminder of the price I had paid for my indiscretions. Lying in that bed, surrounded by the sterile walls of the hospital, I realized the full extent of what I had lost. I had gambled with my life, and now, I was paying the ultimate price. Lying in that hospital bed, the world outside seemed distant, like a story I was no longer a part of. It was here, amidst the sterile white walls, that fate played its cruelest card yet. The mysterious woman who had called me, the voice behind the revelation of Alex's betrayal, was here, in the same hospital. Our paths crossed like two comets destined to collide in shared misery. We met in a small garden at the heart of the hospital, a place where the sick and broken could find a semblance of peace. She was a reflection of my own despair, her eyes holding stories of betrayal just like mine. As we talked, the pieces of the puzzle that was Alex began to fall into place. She, too, had been deceived, her heart trampled by the same man who had shattered mine. The extent of his manipulation, his deceit, was like a labyrinth with no exit. I listened. Each word she spoke a confirmation of the monstrous web Alex had woven around us. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing I wasn't special, just another pawn in his twisted game. Our conversation was a mirror, reflecting the pain we had both endured, the trust we had both misplaced. Leaving the hospital felt like stepping out of a sanctuary into a storm. The real world awaited, unforgiving and relentless. I tried to piece my life back together, but the fabric of it had been torn too severely. Without support, without the anchor of family or friends, every attempt to rebuild felt like grasping at straws in a gale. In my attempt to find closure, I saw them, Mark, my ex-husband, and our children, with their new life, a life where laughter and love had returned. They were a picture of happiness, a stark contrast to the shadow I had become. The sight was a dagger to my already bleeding heart, intensifying the loneliness that had become my constant companion. Driven by a need for closure, for some semblance of justice, I decided to confront Alex in his new city. It was a journey fueled by a mixture of anger, hurt, and a desperate need for answers. But the confrontation was nothing like I had imagined. Alex was a closed book, his face void of any recognition of the pain he had caused. His words were sharp, cutting through any hope I had of remorse or apology. He dismissed me, a discarded plaything that no longer amused him. Returning to my solitary existence, I felt more broken than before. The confrontation had not brought the closure I sought. Instead, it left me with a deeper understanding of the futility of my quest. The realization that I was alone, truly alone, in dealing with the aftermath of my choices, was a chasm too vast to cross. As I sat in the small, cramped space that was now my home, the full extent of my loss dawned on me. The damage I had caused was irreversible, a scar on the landscape of my life and the lives of those I loved. The affair, once a secret thrill, was now the source of my greatest pain, a reminder of everything I had thrown away. In the silence of my solitude, I understood that the journey ahead was one I had to walk alone. The consequences of my actions were mine to bear, a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. The story of my life, once full of promise and love, had ended in a way I never imagined, not with a bang, but with a whimper, echoing the haunting truth of the choices